All right. Welcome everyone to our next presentation on our Environmental Policy 101 series. Today we are going to be doing sustainable transportation. My name is Danny Robles. I am the Legislative Relations Director here at IEC, and besides supporting our relationships with our legislators, I also lead the transportation work here at IEC, and I'm really excited to be your host. And um, today we'll talk a little bit more about sustainable transportation and what that looks like within the environmental landscape. So welcome everyone. I am going to turn it over to my colleague Chelsea Biggs, who's going to walk through a little bit more about what we do at IEC before I take it over.
Thanks, Danny. Hi, everyone. My name is Chelsea Biggs. I'm the Chief of Staff at IEC. Really excited to have you all join us here today for our latest 101 presentation. As Danny mentioned, it's on sustainable transportation, equitable transportation. I'm going to kick us off with a bit of an overview of IEC, who we are, what we do. Then Danny's going to dive into the real meat of the issue. So we're going to talk about the lay of the land. He'll give an overview of what it is that we do in transportation work at IEC. He'll lay out the stakeholders, and then we'll look at the issues at hand and the solutions that we highlight for that. We'll leave plenty of time at the end for Q&A, but if something strikes you, please throw it in the chat. If it's really pertinent, we'll answer it right away. If not, we'll save it till the end. Yeah. So about IEC, we've been around since 1975. We are a membership organization. We represent more than 130 organizations across the state. I'll talk a little bit more about what that means, but essentially what we do is we work to safeguard Illinois, specifically our people, our plants, our animals, and the natural systems by which we all live and depend on. The statement that we use that describes our work best is that we build power for people and the environment. We'll go to the next slide. So we're going to talk a little bit about the issues we work on and how we approach the work that we do. So IEC mostly focuses on 6 issue areas. So we look at sustainable agriculture, conservation, clean energy, sustainable transportation, clean water, and zero waste. A lot of these things are intersectional, and some things are solutions to other issues. And so, we focus on these things. Our approach is coalition building around the state of Illinois. So we work to understand who are the key players around the state that understand the challenges that are being faced in all of these issue areas. We hear from them and understand what the issues are, so that we can better understand how to support them through legislative action. We do legislator education. We think the most effective way to get buy-in from decision makers is to take them outside, get them connected with the work that's happening in their districts and in their communities, so that they can see the importance of nature, so that they can see the importance of the green workforce, transportation needs, clean water, all of that. And then during legislative session, we are very apt at policy advocacy, and all of it is sort of based around the coalition building that we do. Get the next slide. So I talked about this a little bit, but I just want to drive the point home here. So we advanced environmental laws and policies at all levels of government. So we do work across the state of Illinois in Springfield. We do work in the city of Chicago, and we sometimes do work in DC. We build coalitions and influence decision makers. We coordinate our affiliate membership to help share resources with each other, mobilize support for the issues around the state, and we build and create consensus around our annual policy agenda. Next slide. So our affiliates, I've mentioned them a couple of times so far. There's more than 130 organizations, many of whom are on the call today, that work very closely with us throughout the year. So our affiliates range in geographic scope. Some are statewide, some are regional, some are national organizations. And some are hyper-local, community-based organizations. They also vary in size and issue scope. So we really find it important to bring together the voices of all folks that are impacted by the issues we're facing in the environment to ensure that we're getting a broad view of what we need to do as a policy advocacy organization. You can go to the next slide. Our affiliate benefits. So some might think I might be trying to sell you on affiliate membership. Maybe I am, maybe I'm not. So just so you have an idea of what affiliates get as a part of being part of IEC, we run quite a bit like a trade association. So we do provide legislative support. So we pair our affiliates with staff members of IEC that are focused on the issue areas that our affiliates care most about, so that they've got a point person that they can go to with questions. We do movement building. So the advocacy, lobbying, coalition building that I mentioned is a big, we really rely heavily on our affiliates to join us in that work. We do legislative tracking. So during state legislative session, we track all bills that are related to the environment. We provide updates to our affiliates via email and on weekly legislative calls. We have office resources. So here in Chicago or in Springfield, we have office space available for our affiliate members to use, whether it's coming in and using Wi-Fi and working while you're waiting for a meeting at City Hall, or in Springfield at the Capitol. And there's also office space that you can rent for conference rooms and that kind of thing. We do comms support for smaller organizations that need support in building out, social media structures. And what I think is the most important part is this last piece here. Our affiliates truly help build and inform our policy agenda year over year. And so we'll soon be starting those webinars. And for our affiliate member organizations, you'll see those come through. It is a members only perk. And so for each issue area, we'll be talking with our affiliates over the course of 3 webinars to help build out the agenda for next year. You can go to the next slide. So why are we doing these 101s? So this is the first time we've done a series like this before. As you've probably noted, IEC, we work over 6 issue areas. Many of the groups that we work with are hyper focused on one issue area. This is a way for us to open up and share more information across issues within the environmental space for folks that maybe aren't working within transportation. Maybe you're working in conservation, but you're really interested in the advocacy we do around trucks or around public transit. And so we're trying to demystify some of that work for our members and the public overall. And I think I can turn it over to Danny here to give you what you've all been waiting for.
Thank you, Chelsea. And once again, I think for folks who are joining us a little bit late, I want to reintroduce myself. My name is Dan Robles, Legislative Relations Director with the Illinois Environmental Council, and I've been leading this work for the last few years with IEC. And you all might be thinking, transportation and the environment. I think at the top, our mission statement really targeted our need to protect the systems that we live in, and our air, water, and quality. And transportation, has been a big source of pollution that has caused us to really take a look at the transportation sector as an opportunity for us to have our voice in there as environmentalists, and making sure that we are providing some insight and guidance to our legislators and decision makers to make sure that they are prioritizing solutions towards this problem. And I'll talk a little bit more about the problem so we can get started. So one thing I will ask, questions may arise as I'm talking. Please use the chat function to ask questions. We're going to save some time at the end to do that Q&A. So Chelsea and my colleague Stephanie are on board. So Stephanie might be able to provide some answers while I continue talking. But if there's any questions that are left over at the end, I would love to just dish those out at the end. So let's dive a little bit deeper on why are we doing this work in transportation. I think the biggest thing that we continue seeing year after year is the growth of transportation sector being a number one emitter of carbon emissions. And, we all are very well aware, I'm confiding that, if you're in this call, you're really concerned about the environment, you're really concerned about climate change. And we know that carbon dioxide emissions is a huge portion of that. And something you'll continue seeing year after year is this increase. Back in 2021, transportation sector was only 26% of total carbon emissions in the atmosphere. The latest data that we've gotten from the U.S. Energy Information Administration shows that 33% of carbon emissions in Illinois are attributed to our transportation sector. Of those emissions, 60% come from motor gasoline, while another 25% come from diesel pollution. So we can see that cars are a big portion of this. And as we continue to fight against climate change, we really need to think about solutions that expand ways that we can tackle not just um, you know transitioning over to electric vehicles, but the whole holistic approach of how do we shift the way that we approach transportation. Um, and this situation feels a little bit more dire here in Illinois because outside of just the motor fuel stuff, diesel pollution has additional pollutants like particulate matter that cause a lot of cardiovascular and pulmonary effects. And one thing that we've uncovered, thanks to some of our partners and affiliates from Respiratory Health Association, is that here in Illinois, we have 12 counties that are in the top 10% of the most affected by diesel air pollution in the entire US. So you can see that Cook County, we are highly up there in the 99th percentile, along with DuPage and Will County and Lake County, really conglomerated here in the northeastern part of Illinois. But as you can see, it's not just the northeastern part of Illinois, it spreads down to the rest of Illinois. Um, and these harms of transportation pollution are not felt equitably across the board. Black and brown community members feel this brunt in disproportionate amounts in ways that we are seeing higher levels of asthma rates and heart disease in Black and brown communities, and data that we've seen as people show up to ER visits. Our partners within Respiratory Health Association and the American Lung Association have been able to track some of these data points for us. So with that being said, we know that transportation emission is causing the pollution that is warming up the planet. And because of this, Illinois needs to act on transportation issues so that we can mitigate the harms being felt and fight back against climate change. I think oftentimes people think, what can we do when there's a wider world of people or countries that aren't doing any work. But if we aren't being part of the solution, if we aren't being models in how we can bring sustainable and equitable solutions to transportation issues, then we're not moving the needle forward in the direction that we should be. So we have such a great opportunity here in Illinois to really bring some of these solutions forward. And solutions need to span beyond just vehicle electrification. And I think that is one of the things that has helped us shift IAC to be a leader in sustainable and equitable transportation and make it our sixth policy area this year in 2024, is that we don't see the solution of transportation in just electrical vehicles. It has to be a number of different pieces to get us to reduce the carbon emissions that we're seeing in the transportation sector. So we're going to be diving a little bit more into some of these solutions that we've worked on with our partners. And, we are really looking at this in a holistic way of approaching our policies. We need to look at how we shift people away from car dependency towards other safe, active modes of transportation, like walking, biking, electric scooter mobility, and other modes of transportation. And also looking at the way that we are investing in how we are building out roads to make sure that those modes are ways that people feel safe in sharing the road with cars. And we also have to take a look at what are other avenues that people can move around their communities. So really expanding a robust transit system that meets the needs of particular communities across the state of Illinois. And here in the northeastern part of Illinois, as you all saw, we have a disproportionate amount of um, carbon emissions and pollution due to transportation sector. And the number one way we can reduce that pollution is through investing in a robust public transit system. And then as we continue to move forward with um, other solutions, I think there's a lot of people out there who are looking at their own private choices in how they make transportation known. And things that we continue seeing is that there is a movement towards clean vehicles, electric vehicles. And I think as we are moving towards those, we just want to make sure that we're providing insight to our decision makers on how to make those solutions in an equitable and sustainable way that don't continue harming the communities that they're most intended to um, um, serve, and also making sure that we don't continue the same systems of inequity that have led to large levels of poverty across state, across the country, and across the world. So we'll dive a little bit deeper into these, but before we do, I do want to call in the large number of stakeholders that work within transportation that have helped us um, develop these solutions and have helped provide feedback and insight. Sometimes they might be in opposition to some of these um, solutions that we're presenting, but as we work towards finding solutions with them, we continue to develop stronger relationships and also stronger bills that can help us in the long run. So, like Chelsea mentioned at the top of the call, our affiliate network is the number one way that we get information on what solutions our priority and the ways that we move forward in Springfield and Chicago and in DC. And really want to call in the Clean Eco Transportation Coalition, which I see as a co-chair of, which is part of the Illinois Clean Jobs Coalition, alongside the Neighbors for Eco Transition to Zero Emission Vehicles and the Transportation Equity Network. Those three organizations, or those three networks and coalitions really work in concert with each other to make sure that we are tackling the different ways that transportation harms communities, and trying to work within those communities to solve these issues in developing policies that we'll be talking a little bit about. We've also worked very closely with the Chicago Metropolitan Agency for Planning, Regional Transit Authority, and the Illinois Public Transit Association to dissect a little bit more about how public transit currently exists in Illinois and what solutions we can um, move forward in the next few years to make sure that we are building out a system that really prioritizes reliability, accessibility, and safety for uh, commuters across the northern region. And also, the Illinois Department of Transportation has been very active in thinking about their role in, building out roads, building out safer um, infrastructure that will allow the expansion of biking and walking accessibility, and also thinking about this transition towards electrification of vehicles and how their role in developing plans will have a huge impact in that. And also just want to call in some of those folks that at times we've had some opposition with, but important constituents here in the state that are really big partners that we're working to develop relationships to figure out some of these solutions, including the Illinois Truckers Association, the Midwest Truckers Association. Kind of differentiate both of them. We are kind of the connecting line between a lot of states across the country, and truckers have a big say in this conversation, as well as the Automobile Dealers Association and the Illinois Manufacturers Association. So let's talk a little bit about the issues like a little bit deeper and why we're presenting some of the solutions. So, we talked a little bit about, there's a lot of pollution in the air. We see it with diesel pollution, with motor pollution. And part of the reason why we're seeing a lot of this is because roads were the way that we have shaped out our communities and the way that urban planning has existed for the last 50 plus years has really been focused on cars as a mode of transportation and mobility, and they were built for cars and not for people. And we're seeing some issues with that, where you know the number one way that people have tried to solve issues like traffic or bottlenecks is to build more lanes and add more roads. But something that we're seeing is there's um, an induced demand that comes from building more roads that eventually, yes, you might ease the flow of traffic for a shortened timeline, but that additional traffic will create more bottleneck and bigger problems down the line, and you'll see more idling and more pollution down the road. And the other thing that we're also seeing is that um, a lot of the roads across the state have been built without really thinking about um, people walking or biking or rolling, for our ADA friends and colleagues. They don't have the infrastructure needed across the state to make those safe movements in their communities. And it's one of the reasons people continue to choose car as the number one way of dependency is because we don't have a lived environment, a built environment that really allows us to be active, to choose these modes of transportation that at times can be healthier. They could provide more opportunity to meet your community and can also help us reduce the total emissions in um, um, the transportation sector. Issue number two is that here in our state, we have not funded public transportation or transit in a way that can be sustainable, in a way that allows us to have um, reliable dependency on buses and trains arriving at the times that we need and to meet the demands for the state. We worked very closely in the last couple of years with the Chicago Metropolitan Agency for Planning and a whole host of um, organizations across the northeast region to talk a little bit about this upcoming issue with our public transit funding. The way that public transit funding has been built has been very dependent on the fare box rate recovery ratio. So essentially, the money that we pay to access public transit, 50% of that money is meant to go towards operating funds. And something that we're seeing across the country is that other states and other transit agencies have more reliance on their state and their local government to be able to fund their operations because they know that um, public transit is an important need to make sure that uh, community members are connected not only to their jobs, but also to their doctors, to their schools, to their friends and family, and allow people to choose different ways of accessing public transit. And something that we've been seeing here in the state is kind of like a doom spiral of, we lose a bit of transit funding because people aren't going downtown to work as much anymore. So the operation funds are reduced the next year, and then less trains come, and then people start choosing other modes. And we've been kind of seeing the spiral over the last 15, 20 years in the northeastern part of Illinois. The time that we felt it the sharpest was during COVID, and before that was during the 2008 2009 recession, and we haven't been able to recuperate those numbers to the level we are at. And one thing that has a lot of environmentalists and transit advocates and mobility advocates concerned is if we don't address this current spiral, we are due to face a deep fiscal deficit in the next 2 years. And a lot of that is because right now what's holding us up is federal recovery money that is able to provide the additional funds that we haven't been able to meet through the operation funds. And if we don't find funds to meet the $730 million gap that is coming up in 2026, we could potentially see a public transit system across the north eastern part of Illinois that essentially collapses to what we have known in the last 30 to 40 years. And a lot of what this is showing us too is that there are a lot of deficiencies within the transit agencies that operate in northeastern part of Illinois, which include the Chicago Transportation Agency, PACE, and Metro, and all of those are underneath the Regional Transit Authority. So there's four major operating organizations that run the public transit system in the northeastern part of Illinois that aren't communicating well, that aren't collaborating well for the benefits of the constituents in the northeastern part of Illinois. And we continue to see this um, um, lack of satisfaction across the state, which continues to push people towards um, uh, their own private vehicles as a mode of transportation throughout the region. And this fiscal cliff is not only like an opportunity for us to fix that governance structure, but also talk about how do we build a system with additional funds that the state can provide to meet that budget gap that we're seeing. And issue number three that we're seeing is a shifting to cleaner vehicles. Like zero emission vehicles is kind of slowed down and it's halted by the lack of funding and infrastructure. So, the first two issues, are very clear that we need a different way to approach transportation. But, there's still a significant portion of society that will still choose a personal vehicle as their number one choice of mobility. And sometimes that is just because of the way that their community is built. If you travel to a lot of rural communities throughout our state, there really isn't an ability to be able to provide a train system or a bus system that will be financially stable enough to meet the demands of their community. And even if they build sidewalks and pedestrian infrastructure, there's still not a lot of their immediate needs like food, doctors, and work is still pretty far away. So as we are moving towards the potential to bring more zero emission vehicles, we're seeing that there's a lack of funding and infrastructure that's preventing people from making that choice as a next choice. And also, zero emission vehicles are still not affordable for the average consumer, and a lot of that comes from the demand of building the vehicles and also making sure that there is the infrastructure available, so more people will be looking forward to buying those vehicles. So we're seeing a lot of economic and financial issues that are preventing people from making those choices currently that looking to solve in the next uh, several years to figure out how do we get there. Um, um, make zero emission vehicles more palatable to the average American and the average Illinoisan, but also looking at the heavier duty vehicles like trucks, buses, and delivery vans. Something that I didn't name at the top is heavy duty vehicles, although they only account for 7% of the vehicles on the road, they have a larger than size output of greenhouse gases, particulate matter, and CO2 emissions compared to average vehicles. So it's one of the things that a lot of these heavier duty vehicles operate in communities like Black and Brown communities that are experiencing higher levels of health issues because of how many they're seeing. So there is a larger push to make sure that there's intervention to ensure um, that we can provide access to lower emitting vehicles and increasing the inventory size for these larger vehicles. And additional things that we're looking into is what are those gaps that are preventing the companies that provide fleets to be able to shift towards those lower emitting vehicle infrastructure. So something that we've worked on very closely is this Clean and Eco Transportation Act that was just introduced at the end of April. And this is a large package of legislation that we worked very closely with the Illinois Clean Jobs Coalition to develop, introduce, and now we're working to build awareness and um, insight on, and also community feedback on, because I think one thing that we really pride ourselves is that we don't run bills without getting community input, because at the end of the day we want to make sure that we are protecting our communities from the parts, the worst harms that come from pollution and inequities. And if we're not having those conversations with our community members, then we're not really living up to those values. And that is something that the Clean Eco Transportation Campaign is working on this summer, is to put together some community engagement sessions that we're calling listening shares, to get that insight on this massive package, which includes three separate bills. There's the Transportation Choices Act, which establishes target to reduce emissions from the transportation sector to be 100% carbon free by 2050, and align state spending to support this clean and equitable transportation. Um, there's also the Metropolitan Mobility Authority Act, which will implement a long and overdue transit funding, and shift a lot of the governance structures that currently exist to establish a unified regional agency that's capable to delivering the safe, reliable, and frequent transit system that riders need. And then a Zero Emission Transportation Act, which establishes standards to increase the availability and reliability of zero emission vehicles, and move our public fleets to zero emissions by a certain timeline, and increase the build out of charging infrastructure while also facilitating a race to the top for vehicle workers. I think that is a big piece of the conversation within the zero emissions work, is making sure that automobile manufacturers are providing proper services and um, wages for their workers that will help them sustain for the long run. So we'll dive a little deeper into each one of these um, bills. So the Transportation Choices Act was introduced by Senator Aquino and Representative Canty earlier this year in April. And this really follows suit with a couple other states that have already implemented GHG reduction targets with their Department of Transportation and their metropolitan planning organizations. And those include states like Minnesota and Colorado, who over the last 2 years have worked on developing these targets. And through that, they develop planning processes to ensure that these transit agencies are complying with those targets and meeting their goals. And part of that work is making sure that there is a scoring rubric that um, agencies are working to make sure that any project that they're looking to develop, any road construction that they're looking to develop, is being prioritized via a climate accessibility score, and really analyzing, will this project have long-term benefits to reducing carbon emissions. If the initial analysis shows that it won't, then there is the likelihood that that project will be nixed, or that they would have to produce a different project that will help alleviate that. Um, and a lot of this, like I was mentioning, is the enforcement mechanism that really makes this a really strong target compliance. What we're seeing out in Colorado is that they are reducing the amount of highway expansions and really focusing on some bus priority lanes, and also a lot of cycling infrastructure alongside the highways to make sure that people are choosing different modes of transportation, and really being flexible in how they meet those targets. So looking at the different options that people have, or projects that people may have, is make sure that we're developing the pedestrian infrastructure, uh, developing better technology for travel demand, public transit being a big portion of the work, cycling infrastructure, looking at those modes to make sure that there's heavy duty charging nearby, and also prioritizing clean construction that is also built on top of equitable transit-oriented development that will also hopefully build more affordable homes and create more jobs because we're bringing more people into the area. And then the shared mobility to make sure that there's multiple ways that people can move throughout the region or move throughout their communities to ensure that there isn't um, an over reliance on just public vehicles. The second bill that makes up the Clean Aqua Transportation Act is the Metropolitan Mobility Authority Act. I forgot the authority in this slide. And that was introduced by Senator Villavalum and Representative Buckner. And there's a couple major goals on this one. The big one to address here is really looking at the state to identify uh, an annual amount of $1.5 billion to invest in improving the public transit system across the state of Illinois to make sure that there's exceptional service, universally accessible systems, safe and comfortable rides, integrated and affordable fares, and desirable destinations within reach, and really looking to um, look at different ways that we can approach identifying these funds. And I think right now the conversation is starting to open up with the governor's office and with other um, legislators on how can we get this funding. Because one thing that we are also hearing from our state legislators is that for us to make this demand of money, there has to be some reform at the governance level. And um, what this looks like is that we are looking to make one agency rather than three or four agencies in the northeast part of Illinois to make sure that there is less overhead at the top to make sure, I think one of the things that we're seeing with the regional boards is that with the four boards, there's over 60 board members, but with one agency, we could reduce that down to 15 to 18 board members that will be able to report on transit use and be able to work more expeditiously to make sure that they are prioritizing projects that will help connect community members and really be centered around the rider experience, how people are viewing the service and making sure that we're fixing the way that the experience is developed in a way that speeds up the process for communities, and there doesn't have to be multiple coordination calls between the four service agencies when we can just have one. Think other things that this would allow us is to making sure that there's just one unified fare structure and a way that people who are traveling from the um, outer suburbs in the Clark counties don't have to pay like multiple fares to get all the way down to the city. And I think something that we continually see is this frustration that for people traveling within the region, they have to have multiple fare cards to be able to access that. And although we've gotten some movement from RTA to get there, they've been really harmstrong by having to work with all the agencies where one agency would have made that availability move faster. And then on top of that, refixing that fare box recovery ratio that I would mention that really prevents the operate or kind of like hamstrings the operations to be tied to the amount of users rather than the actual like needs for service that is needed and treats public transit not as a business but more as a public service that is needed and allows us to make our proper decisions towards how we use land, how we collaborate with our Department of Transportation, how do we develop safety for the network, and also making sure that there is accountability and protected rights for our workers who are the backbone of the service. And then the final bill that makes up the Clean Eco Transportation Act is the Zero Emissions Vehicle Act, or the ZEV Act. And this looks at multiple fronts in how we are developing zero emission vehicle infrastructure, from making sure that there's a pilot program for utilities to ensure that there's more inclusive access to zero emission vehicle chargers, that there is proper investment in collecting data for where we're seeing an increase in zero emission vehicles, and making sure that we're prioritizing the areas that need it the most. And then I think the big piece for us is making sure that there is a transition from our government vehicles to make sure that they're fully zero emission by a certain date, to support any extraneous events out there. Well, we created exemptions to make sure that we're supporting any extraneous events that may prevent the availability of vehicles. But I think the big piece that we're looking to also develop is making sure that as the government is transitioning to those zero emission vehicles, that they are prioritizing manufacturers that are providing fair wages and proper job accessibility for their workers. Um, the other thing with the Zero Emissions Vehicle Act is that this also includes the Advanced Clean Cars and Advanced Clean Trucks rules. It allows us to set up pollution limits for new diesel engines. It sets manufacturer target dates to make sure that there's an increasing amount of vehicles sold, zero emission vehicles sold in Illinois in 2035, and also increases the amount of choices that people have towards electric cars, trucks, and buses. Because as manufacturers are starting to develop more zero emission vehicles, they are prioritizing states that already have these mandates in the state. And in doing so, we can also reduce those harmful chemicals that I mentioned, like nitrogen oxide and particulate matter, by 90%, because we do have those options available. And the impact of all these three bills together is that we can reduce the greenhouse gas emissions in our state in such a deep, stark contrast. It will improve the air quality for a lot of community members across the state, but it also will provide cost savings for people who, rely too much on operating and owning vehicles, or the folks who do choose zero emission vehicles. There is long-term analysis that the longer you own a zero emission vehicle, the more affordable it is compared to an internal combustion engine vehicle. And then I think the piece that we're really working towards is this infrastructure for biking and walking, and just overall safety on the roads to help um, prevent fatal crashes throughout the state, and then promote a healthier environment or healthy living by having people have the options to be able to move throughout their communities, either by walking or biking in a way that they feel safe. Um, and I want to save some time for questions. So I'm going to kind of summarize these last three, because these are kind of very tied to a zero emission vehicle landscape, is making sure that we give our utility companies the ability to make um, decarbonization and air quality decisions in a faster manner, something that we've seen in other states that brought in a lot of electric vehicles, where that their energy grid system wasn't able to meet the demand that they needed because of the process that their commerce commissions needed to move. So we've worked very closely with our partners from the Natural Resources Defense Council to help push Power Up Illinois, and it is a bill that is going to be coming up during veto session as an opportunity for us to make our grid flexible to the zero emission vehicles that we're looking in the future. We're also deep in conversation with the Clean Transportation Standard, or the Low Carbon Fuel Standard, with Senator Kaler's office. There's a lot of our members and our affiliates who have expressed a lot of concern with low carbon fuel standards across the states, and we are listening and hearing those concerns and making sure that we are providing those insights to Senator Kaler as he's working with the governor's office to move this forward. And for us, we're making sure that those concerns, whether they're from the agricultural landscape, whether they're from the environmental justice communities, or whether just from our environmental partners, that we are making sure we're providing those pieces of information, and making sure that we are drawing the line that any low carbon fuel standard has to be made to make sure that we're meeting the needs for Illinoisans, and that we aren't replicating and reproducing the same results that we're seeing in other states that are producing harmful results because of improper development of their low carbon fuel standard. And then finally, really talking about an overall environmental justice landscape, is we're working with our partners with the Environmental Defense Fund, Warehouse Workers for Justice, Neighbors for Environmental Justice, and Little Village Environmental Justice Organization to put together a health and equity insights bill to make sure that we have sufficient monitoring technology to help us identify where the highest concentration of pollutants are in Illinois. Something that might astound many of you is that our local environmental protection agency doesn't have enough federal required air monitors across the state to really monitor where we're seeing harms and pollutants. And something that we're really tying this to is the increase of warehousing in the state over the last 20, 30 years has produced more truck traffic in our state that is causing those higher levels of pollutants. And we want to make sure that the state has the technology available to collect that data, develop a network, and for us to analyze those levels and identify which communities need to be prioritized in these investments to make sure that overburdened communities have the initial investment, and making sure that we are spending our money in a way that feels well targeted for the improvement of our state. So that was a lot. Before I turn it over to questions, just want to once again pitch out that we're a growing environmental movement. Our work here at IEC really depends a lot on individual contributors, on people who are really passionate about the environment. And the biggest way that y'all can help safeguard Illinois along with us is by becoming a member. Membership runs on a calendar year and starts at only $50 a year. If you're a student, you could do it for $20 a year. That is less than a movie these days, I believe. So,
that was a great pitch. Yeah, we had someone in the chat ask how an everyday person can get involved. And the best way to do that is to become a member of IEC. So as Danny said, it's fairly cheap, but also you'll get, first round information as things are happening. You'll get action alerts and how to participate when pieces of legislation are coming up for vote, so that you can file witness slips, call your legislators, and be involved in that way. So if you have more questions about that, you can throw it in the chat and either Danny or I can answer. But we have lots of good questions in here, Danny. So, and for folks that joined a little later, feel free to put your questions in the chat box and we'll pop them up here, and Danny can lead us through. We've got 9 minutes, so we'll see how far we can get through. If we have questions we can't get to, we can always type up some summaries and send them out to folks after.
Yes. I've been seeing Stephanie's been able to answer a few of these questions.
Yeah.
Do you want to call in Benjamin Nagy asks, what is IC's position on regulations that require green cement and concrete be used for public transportation infrastructure projects? Benjamin, that's a great question. And if you have any studies or information that we can use and look into, we would love to help put together a position on that. I know some of our partners are really interested in just the best ways to make sure that we are reducing carbon emissions. And I know that, as we're building out, that also poses a lot of potential harms with carbon emissions. And this kind of ties a little bit into the work that we do with building decarbonization and making sure that, we are pushing for new zoning laws that will help build in a way that isn't expanding on carbon emissions.
Great. Another question, can we get a copy of the slides? Yes, we'll be sharing out a recording and we can certainly share out a PDF of the slides. And Benjamin already responded that he'll reach out. So that's great. Thank you. I love connections every day. So the next question, is there any chance we could get the city to gain control of the air quality monitors Microsoft installed at bus stops across the city? They ended the project, but it really should have been owned by the city to track participant population. Danny does a lot of work around air quality monitoring. So do you want to give a little context on that?
Yeah, Don, that's a great question. I think that is like a question that we can bring up with the city. Recently, one of the things that we've worked very closely with them is developing a department of environment that can have a bigger say in some of these analysis and how they are developing um um community-based agreements with corporations that will help them gain some of that control. I think, the last couple administrations didn't take environment as seriously as they needed to, with the new Department of Environment and our commissioner. We know that we have someone who's really guided by the right mission in bringing some of those solutions. So that's something that, we're going to start putting together some city issue planning calls on each one of these issue areas. And that is something that we can work on with our city programs director and some of our team to make sure that we are having those conversations with those agencies.
There's no more questions as of yet, but still feel free to throw them in because we've got a couple more minutes. Danny, if you want to go to the next slide, I just want to let folks know that, this is a part of a series that we're doing monthly to highlight the 6 issue areas and more for the work that we do. So, we've done conservation, we've done the Inflation Reduction Act, we have done zero waste. If you want to hear those, we have them recorded and can share. So definitely let me know. Coming up, next month, which is already next week, we're going to do one on clean water. Then we'll go into food systems and sustainable agriculture. In September, we'll talk through clean energy. And in October, we'll have Danny back with a few other members of our team to talk about workforce and the climate-centered economy. You can also find more information on these webinars at the URL listed on the screen there.
Perfect.
Without any other questions, thank you all for coming, and thank you, Danny, for providing such a great detailed presentation about our transit work. If folks have questions at any point, you can always reach out to us directly, and we're always happy to connect with you.
Thank you all.